Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you this advanced laminate slingshot which I've made and how to make it. This slingshot was designed and made by Yorksbrav originally and is the Rambone Slingshot design, and I'll put a link in the description to the Rambone Slingshot blueprints. This is one of my most favourite slingshots which I've made so far, just because it's got loads of laminations onto it and it feels really nice in my hand. And I've added loads of extra parts to make it look cool, for example the metal spines running down the palm swell and the acrylic stripe. The core is made of some 3mm thick aluminium, and that's sandwiched either side by some 3mm red acrylic. The palm swell is made of some hardwood which I had lying about, and the finger swell is made of some mahogany wood. The tip of the finger swell is made of some black plastic, and the fork part on this side is made of some 18mm multiplex birch plywood. The fork part on this side is made of some swirly jewellery making resin which I bought for cheap off eBay. So now, let's see how you make the slingshot. So I started by tracing on the outline of the Rambone Slingshot onto some 3mm aluminium and some 3mm acrylic. This is going to be the core for the slingshot. I then cut out the aluminium using a jigsaw, and it wasn't very accurate, so I needed to file it down using files. I'm filing down the aluminium just using metal files which I have, and I'm going to refine the shape until I'm really happy with it. So now the aluminium core is perfect to how I'd like it, I'm going to trace it onto the 3mm thick acrylic. I need to drill holes around where all of the sharp corners are on the acrylic, because I'm going to be cutting it out using my jigsaw and it can't make any of the sharp corners. This is what both pieces look like once I've cut them out. I'm now going to glue them together using 2-part epoxy resin, and I've roughened up the surfaces with some 80 grit sandpaper. When I clamp up the layers, I need to make sure that I don't clamp them up too tight or it'll squeeze all of the glue out. This is what all 3 layers look like once the glue has set. I'm now using rasps and files to shape the acrylic down to the shape of the aluminium. Once this is done, the core is complete and I think it looks really good. I've now cut out a piece of 18mm multiplex birch plywood to the rough profile of the fork, and I'm just going to glue it on. Once the epoxy glue has set, I can use some very sharp rasps to remove the material very quickly so that it's flush with the core. This is what the slingshot looks like once I've done that. I'm now going to glue on some hardwood that I had lying about as the palm swell. Again, I'm just using a 2-part epoxy and I'm clamping it up using my vise. I've made sure that there's glue in between the parts where the multiplex joins and the wood joins so that there's no gaps. Now it's time to use rasps and files to start to shape the palm swell. First I make sure that it's flush with the core, and then once it is, I'm going to start to round it so that it fits into my palm really well. Once I've rounded the basic shape, I'm not going to start rounding the edges of it yet, because I want to make the acrylic core going down the middle of the palm swell. To do that, I'm just going to start off by using a wood saw just to cut a slot into the palm swell. I can then enlarge the slot using a metal file, and the red acrylic can easily fit inside. Again, I'm going to glue it in with some more epoxy, but this time, because there's going to be quite a lot of gaps to fill, I'm going to put in some sawdust in with the epoxy. This is what the acrylic looks like once the glue is set, and I'm now going to use rasps and files just to shape it down to the profile of the palm swell. Now that that's done, I'm going to glue on some mahogany wood for the finger swell. Once the glue sets, I can very quickly remove all of the material that I need to, just using rasps and a saw. You can shape this however you like, and you don't have to do a finger swell. You can do it the same way that Yorksbrav does in his Rambone Slingshots, but I prefer to have a finger swell. This is what everything looks like once I've finished basic profiling it. Even with some of the sharp edges, it fits my hand really well. Now I'm going to hold it in my hand and squeeze it very tight and see what digs into my hand, and then I'm going to start to curve it round. To do this, as always, I'm just going to be using rasps and files, and I'm going to be using rasps to take off a lot of the material, and then once I get close to how I'd like it, I'm going to be using files. It's important that you don't rush this step, otherwise your final slingshot won't fit your hand very well. Now that all of the shaping is done for the handle, the slingshot's starting to take shape. Now it's time to make the metal spines, which are going to be embedded in the handle. For this, I'm just going to use a thick woodworking saw, and I'm just going to make cuts into the palm swell of the slingshot, being careful to make sure that they're horizontal with the slingshot. Once the cuts are finished, then I can cut out some metal that's the right thickness, and then I can glue it into the handle. And I'm going to be using 2-part epoxy again for this. I've also added some pins into the handle just to stabilize all of the wood. This is what it looks like once the glue has set, and there are a lot of excess bits of metal poking out that would be really uncomfortable, so I need to file them down using metal files. When I'm using the metal files, I'm being careful not to dislodge any of the metal pieces out of the slots. This is how the palm swell looks once I've finished putting all of the metal in and filing it down, and I think that it's really starting to look good. I've had to add some metal pins going all the way through the slingshot because the glue wasn't bonding very well with some of the acrylic. Now I'm going to start to shape the fork area since I've already shaped all of the handles. So I'm going to start off by gluing on some fluorescent acrylic on the edges, and then I'm going to glue on some swirly jewellery making resin which I bought off eBay. I've also added some pins into the jewellery making resin just to make sure that it stays on the material. So now I'm just going to file everything down using rasps, and I'm also wearing a dust mask so that I don't get any bad fumes from the resin in my lungs. This is what it looks like once I've finished basic profiling all of the edges. Now I'm just going to contour the front bit so that it looks like it's all flowing into each other and there are no sharp edges or corners. I'm also going to curve all of the multiplex plywood so that you can see the contours that happen because of the different layers, and this will make a really nice pattern when I'm done. This is what the final shape of the slingshot looks like once everything's been curved. I've also used a rat tail file to add grooves for the bands to attach along the top here. After I'd finished curving the slingshot, I accidentally dropped it on the floor and the bottom piece of mahogany wood broke off, and I just replaced it with some black plastic. Now I'm going to start the process of sanding everything all the way up to 1000 grit, and then I'm going to use a buffing wheel to polish it all. When sanding the slingshot, I find it easier sometimes if I wrap it around a solid object so that the sandpaper doesn't just bend away, and then I start with 80 grit and then I move my way all the way up to 1000 grit. You know when to move on to the next grit of sandpaper because the grit that you would be currently using is no longer removing any more scratches. This is what the slingshot looks like once I've roughly sanded it all the way up to 600 grit. I'm then going to go over it with a 1000 grit sanding sponge, and then I'm going to use it on my buffing wheel. Once that's done, I can just use my cotton buffing wheel straight onto the wood. I don't need to add any compound or anything, and then it makes it super shiny and super smooth. This is what it looks like after that's done. Since the slingshot's now so smooth, it's ready to be oiled. I'm just going to be using sunflower oil, but you could also use any other natural oils, and I've heard that linseed oil works really well. This is what the slingshot looks like once it's been freshly oiled, and they're going to leave that oil to dry and keep on adding more layers. In the end, I've ended up adding 3 layers of sunflower oil to the slingshot. It's now done, and I think it looks really nice. This is actually what the slingshot looks like once the oil has dried, but it's still really shiny, and it makes it look like the oil is still wet. Now the slingshot's done, I can add it to my collection of other Rambone slingshots which I've made. If you want to see how to make any of these slingshots, then check the link in the description to see my playlist of Rambone slingshot tutorials. I've now banded up the slingshot with some double layered TheraBand gold, and I'm just going to be firing some M12 hex nuts at my target. These hex nuts do quite a lot of damage and they just leave a small entry hole, but then on the way out they leave a massive rip. Now it's time for some slow motion, and this is filmed at 240 frames a second with a GoPro Hero 3 Black. So thanks for watching guys, I really hope that you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please hit the like button down below and subscribe. Also, if you did enjoy this video, then you'll probably like most of the other projects on my channel, so go and check them out. If you have any other suggestions that you want me to make in a future video, then just send me a personal message.